Have you ever stopped to wonder who actually writes the version of history you grew up believing? The one in your school textbook, with smiling pilgrims and noble founding fathers, with neat timelines and clean morals? Most of us assume it's written by historians, people who've spent their lives uncovering the past, weighing evidence, and reporting truth. But what if I told you that's rarely the case? What if the real authors of American history are politicians, corporate executives, and lobbyists who've never taught a class in their lives? What if the history of the United States has been edited, not by scholars, but by committees with political agendas, marketing departments, and ideological biases? Think about it. Who decides whether children learn that the US expanded westward or invaded sovereign nations? Who decides if slavery was a necessary evil or a foundational sin? Who decides which movements are celebrated and which are erased? Tonight, we're going to peel back the glossy covers of those familiar textbooks and look at the system that manufactures American memory. Because the truth isn't written by the victors, it's written by whoever wins the printing contract. And the story of how that happened will change the way you see everything you thought you knew about your own country. In the early 1800s, education in America was a local affair. Teachers used whatever materials they could find: Bible passages, farmers' almanacs, moral pamphlets, sometimes even handwritten lessons passed from one classroom to another. But as America industrialized, and as public schooling expanded after the 1830s, a new opportunity emerged: mass-produced textbooks. Publishers like Harper and Brothers and the Cincinnati-based firm that printed the McGuffey Readers realized they could make a fortune selling uniform lessons to schools across the growing nation. The McGuffey Readers alone sold over 120 million copies by the end of the 19th century, shaping generations of American minds. But these weren't just reading lessons. They were moral and ideological blueprints. Each story preached industriousness, obedience, patriotism, and Christian virtue. They were designed to unify a fractured, immigrant-heavy nation around a single identity: white, Protestant, and male. They erased indigenous cultures, omitted enslaved Africans, and ignored the working poor. They called westward expansion progress, the conquest of Mexico destiny, and the extermination of native peoples settlement. The textbook wasn't a mirror of America. It was a mold, forcing millions of children to fit into a story that glorified conquest and called it civilization. By the late 1800s, as compulsory education laws spread, textbook publishing became big business. Companies like Ginn and Company and Houghton Mifflin built monopolies on the promise of standardization. And as education became more centralized, these publishers realized that they didn't just make money from selling books. They made power from defining what counted as knowledge. By the 20th century, two states, Texas and California, became the undisputed kings of textbook approval. They were big, rich, and full of students, which meant every major publisher fought to please them. The logic was simple. If your textbook got approved in Texas or California, you could sell it nationwide without rewriting. If it didn't, you could lose millions. That gave state education boards near total control over the content of American history. But here's the catch. These boards weren't made up of historians or educators. They were often political appointees, activists, or even ministers. In Texas especially, from the 1960s onward, the Board of Education became a battleground for the culture wars. Conservative members demanded that textbooks highlight the Christian foundations of America. They objected to evolution, feminism, and even references to the civil rights movement that seemed too radical. A single objection from a single board member could force an entire revision, and publishers, terrified of losing Texas, caved again and again. Words like imperialism were softened to expansion. Slave trade became Atlantic trade. Conquest became settlement. In the 1990s, one Texas official complained that textbooks were too negative about capitalism, so entire paragraphs on child labor, pollution, and corporate abuse were quietly cut. And because publishers wanted to sell the same edition nationwide, those changes spread across all 50 states. That means a handful of politically appointed individuals in one state shaped what tens of millions of American students learned. California, meanwhile, often pushed for more inclusive content about women, immigrants, and indigenous peoples, but even those victories were diluted by national compromise. The result? A patchwork of balanced textbooks that tell no one the full truth, designed not to educate, but to offend the fewest people possible. Open a mid-century history textbook, and you'll find a version of America that never really existed. The Trail of Tears becomes a long journey westward. The genocide of native nations becomes a difficult period of adjustment. The Civil War is described as a conflict between two regions rather than a war to end slavery. And when slavery is mentioned, it's often framed as an unfortunate institution that some owners treated humanely. Even the photographs and illustrations were chosen to reinforce comfort over truth. Images of happy pilgrims dining peacefully with indigenous neighbors, factory workers smiling at machines that exploited them, and heroic soldiers fighting noble wars. Entire peoples disappear from the narrative. Textbooks routinely omitted the existence of indigenous resistance movements, black rebellions, or immigrant labor uprisings. Women's history was compressed into sidebars, if it appeared at all. The Great Depression became a story of national resilience, not corporate greed. Vietnam was controversial, not catastrophic. And the civil rights struggle, boiled down to one speech by Martin Luther King Jr., was presented as a completed chapter, as if racism died the moment he spoke of his dream. Why? Because publishers wanted neutrality, but neutrality in history is rarely neutral. It protects power. Every omission was a decision, every euphemism a small act of erasure. By the late 20th century, America's young people were learning a history so sanitized it bordered on fiction. A version of the past where no one was truly evil, no injustice was systemic, and every mistake was quickly redeemed by American exceptionalism. It was history as comfort food, and comfort, not truth, became the curriculum. Fast forward to today, and the battle over textbooks has exploded into open warfare. Across the United States, politicians and activists fight not over facts, but over who has the right to define them. In some states, teachers are legally forbidden to discuss systemic racism. In others, entire book lists have been banned for mentioning sexuality, gender, or colonialism. Terms like critical race theory, woke, and patriotic education have become weapons in a political tug-of-war. Florida's Department of Education has rejected textbooks for using the word social justice. Texas has considered removing references to the Ku Klux Klan being morally wrong. And in Oklahoma, new laws threaten teachers who suggest that racism shaped American laws or institutions. The goal, once again, is control. Control over how young people see their country, and therefore their future. But this isn't new. It's the same struggle that's existed for 150 years, dressed in modern language. Only now, it's turbocharged by media and ideology. On one side are those demanding an honest reckoning with history, who argue that understanding the past's violence and hypocrisy is the first step toward progress. On the other side are those who believe that acknowledging those truths is unpatriotic, that America's story must remain a tale of moral perfection. The tragedy is that in this war, students lose, because whether it's one group deleting black authors or another pushing politically sanitized narratives, the result is the same. Young Americans grow up learning selective truths, each state teaching a different moral universe. The battlefield isn't the classroom, it's the mind. While politicians and pundits fight their culture wars in public, a quieter battle rages in corporate boardrooms. The textbook industry today is dominated by a few massive companies, Pearson, McGraw-Hill, and Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. These aren't educational charities, they're billion-dollar corporations that answer to shareholders. Their goal isn't accuracy, it's profit. And the real money isn't just in selling textbooks, it's in selling tests, software, and data. These companies often write the very exams students are required to take, and then sell the study materials used to prepare for those exams. It's a closed loop of influence. They create the standards, write the tests, and supply the answers. And every step of the way, they shape content to fit market demands, not historical truth. In 2015, Pearson spent millions lobbying state legislatures to adopt Common Core standards, then produced the textbooks and tests to match them. The result was a standardized national curriculum that often erased local voices and critical perspectives. Lobbyists wine and dine education officials, fund political campaigns, and flood school districts with consultants who push corporate-approved curricula. Meanwhile, smaller independent publishers, often those producing more diverse or honest materials, can't compete. They can't afford to print 50 different editions or fight 50 different state boards. So the system becomes self-reinforcing. A few corporations decide what's written, politicians decide what's approved, and the rest of us decide nothing. Even the language of marketing tells the story. Words like heritage, values, and patriotism are focus tested for approval. Words like racism, exploitation, or imperialism are quietly removed because they don't sell. History becomes branding, and branding becomes memory. But despite all that, cracks are appearing in the wall. Teachers are creating underground networks of free, open-source lesson plans. Students are demanding classes that tell the truth. And new digital platforms, archives, podcasts, documentaries are starting to fill the void left by corporate silence. The truth is fighting its way back into the classroom, one unapproved story at a time. So, who really decides what students learn? Who controls the story of America? It's not the teachers who stand in front of the class every day. It's not even the parents who argue at school board meetings. It's a small web of publishers, politicians, and power brokers who understand something profound. That if you can shape the past, you can control the future. The story of America that we're taught in school isn't a mirror. It's a curated illusion, meant to inspire pride, but not reflection. And yet, we live in a time when the illusion is cracking. The internet, grassroots historians, and independent educators are exposing the hidden hands behind our textbooks. The question now isn't just who writes history, it's whether we're willing to read beyond it. If we want a truer, freer, more honest America, it begins with unlearning the myths we were taught as children. Because only when we face the uncomfortable truths of our past Can we build something better in the future? What did you think about today's video? Comment your thoughts and suggestions for my next video below. And as always, thank you for watching Echoes of America, where we uncover the truths they tried to erase.